Welcome to People Power, y'all. My name is Merjan, speaking truth to power by bringing you voices from the grassroots. So today I got a special episode. We're doing live, and I'm gonna skip updates today. I'll come back. I'll try to get updates for y'all on Friday. But I got a couple special guests here with me, and if we go back to, I think it was episode 26, I had one of the founding ARA members, Kieran Knutson, who's also a labor activist and an anti-racist community organizer in Minneapolis. So I got Kieran back along with the extra special guest from the West Coast, a brother who's originally from Chicago, but also grew up in Minneapolis, and another co-founder of the ARA, poet emcee Mike Crenshaw. Thanks for joining me, fellas, on People Power.
Hey, thanks for having us, Marcel. All right.
All right, y'all. So today's topic is abolish the police, of course. And I know Kieran's been actively involved in all these conversations locally. And I know, Mike, you've been following this uprising. And I know, obviously, it's spreading everywhere. It's out there in Portland. Is there a police abolitionist movement out there in Portland, Mike? And if so, what does abolish the police mean out there? And what does it mean to you? Because it's meaning different things, and folks are watering that shit down.
So there is a movement, but I only say that because I've been close to individuals who were abolitionists, and as part of other formations, I would come across their abolitionist politics. There was a group out here called Decolonize PDX, and it was primarily activists of color that were in that group, and we were talking about different strategies to decolonize our professional spaces, our social spaces, and ultimately thinking of, about how do we decolonize as people and groups of people in this society. So that said, that was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I came across people talking about abolitionists in terms of the prison industrial complex as well as police. And what I want to say is, when I first heard those ideologies being spoken, I want to say I never spoke out loud on it, but internally I was kind of skeptical because I didn't feel like it was the type of thing that could win mass support. I felt like it was too radical for the masses to get behind, because a lot of people have these questions about, well, if the police go away, how are we going to protect ourselves from the criminals? And even some good radical people, some good progressive people, and so on. And most definitely liberals, I would find, would have that type of thinking. That said, I'm seeing now for the first time in my lifetime the actual practical need in a way that I feel could get mass support because of what's happened in the wake of George Floyd's murder.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And how about you, Kieran? So you're hearing all the different conversations here in Minneapolis, in the mainstream media and around the world, around police brutality, defund the police, and abolish the police. What is your take on, the watering down of the term, and what is your understanding of abolish the police?
Mm-hmm. I think the main thing I'd say is that I don't think you can separate it from the kind of overall revolutionary approach that's needed, that the police are there to protect the systems based on exploitation and oppression, racism, white supremacy being one of the foundations of it. And so when we say abolish the police, we're talking about the need to abolish the whole system, I think that's the approach. And I think and I think in some ways that's to speak to the concern that Mike was pointing out to, that a lot of people have, that's the only context in which it really can happen. That said, I'm really glad it's being popularized, because I think that means people are losing faith in any kind of little, crumbs or little, quick fixes to a system that people are understanding more and more is unjust and unreformable. And so, I see it as a really good thing it's being popularized right now. I think there are attempts to kind of, because it's such a popular framework now, the powers that be are trying to have to incorporate it into their policy plans. And I just think we have to be very careful about that and very firm about exposing when they're calling something, abolition, when it's really just, painting a pig a different color or whatever.
Yeah, to add to what you're saying, Kieran, this is Mike again, and I think that the push to do kind of mild reform and make concessions and paint it as something radical is going to be a lot of what we start to see. That said, what I want to say before I jump off you guys is, and Kieran and I have touched on this recently, while we push to abolish the police, I want people to be simultaneously conscious of the need to develop community defense. And that's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Because one of the things I fear that we're going to start to see, and we're already seeing it in Seattle. I'm not sure what's happening out there, but we're going to start to see a lot of retaliatory behavior by police. And if the police in this current and historic institution have had no problem killing us, then I fear that there's going to be an escalated level of violence as we face repression and retaliation for the radical movement that's taking place.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for saying that, Mike. I know you got to jump off, and I hope to have you back in the next week or so, brother.
Okay, brother. Y'all have a good day.
You too, man.
Take it easy, Mike.
So for folks who maybe haven't been following as closely as us here in Minneapolis, last week there was a lot of momentum around ending policing in Minneapolis, thanks to some radical Black organizers, Black Visions Collective, a multiracial coalition, Reclaim the Block. Minneapolis has had an abolitionist movement for years that have been pushing to defund, divest, and send that money back to Black and brown communities to address social ills, racial poverty, right? Because that is what causes crime in our communities. We know that's what drives crime. So there was a big forum hosted on Sunday at Powderhorn Park here in South Minneapolis by Reclaim the Block and Black Visions Collective. And they were able to get 9 city council members who showed up. And according to all the press, they pledged to disband and dismantle Minneapolis police. That was Sunday. Monday night, I saw Minneapolis City Council member Lisa Bender live on Chris Cuomo on CNN, backtracking that. They were talking about reform. Chris Cuomo, he ended the show by giving Lisa Bender the opportunity to clarify herself for the world. Are you saying get rid of the police, or are you saying we need a better system rebuilt from the ground up? And she said that she is determined to create something better that works for our community. So that was clearly reform. And then I also saw social media posts from a city council member, Andrew Johnson, basically saying the same thing. Did you see those posts?
Yeah, I did. Yep. And hang on one second.
So
I did, and I think I saw some backtracking from some other folks where I think what's going to be coming is this idea that they want to get input from citizens for the next year. I think is the latest thing I heard from some of the city council members, which, okay, if you're trying to build support for something, you need to get popular support for it, and you need to get input. But it's also very clearly a way to let the energy dissipate around it, right? So a year from now, it's hard to maintain momentum after an uprising like we've been through. And a year from now, I think the balance of forces may be different. And so it could be a way to placate us. It also can pull radical organizers who are doing direct action and confronting the police into sort of more system-oriented stuff of going to city council meetings and engaging in policy discussions with the city government, which has a conservatizing effect on movements if that becomes their priority for political work. So I saw the same things you see, and I see it as again, that there's an attempt to use the language of the movement without really delivering the goods that the movement wants.
Right. Yep. And so, what are next steps for this movement, for these organizers who see, these politicians starting to backtrack within 24 hours? And so I also have been having a lot of conversations with folks. They think the sky is falling, right? Like, nobody is calling to end policing tomorrow. That's just not a reality. I think even the folks who are most radically pushing to end this terrorist institution that has terrorized Black, Brown, Indigenous communities since its inception, that we all get that this is going to be, a process, right? I personally think it could be done in a matter of 2 years or less. But I think it begins with building community responses to the needs that we see every day, right? Like, I know folks, I believe it was the 5th precinct, folks in the community have studied police calls, and they found out well over 80% were domestic, neighborly disputes, nonviolent disputes that could have been handled with mediators, social workers. So we've been having those conversations in the community about how do we shift funds from, different sources into neighborhood organizations, other community organizations that have those relationships with neighbors that know the needs or that have been listening to the needs. And how do we build from the ground up community, not policing, but community response systems that involve mental health support, that involve chaplains? That was a new idea for me, like having spiritual advisors in our community that could talk to families, that could talk to neighbors with a non-religious lens on it. I thought that was brilliant. You want to speak on any of that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, we need to start building the infrastructure to the degree we can that's alternatives to the police. But the other thing that we can't sort of pretend otherwise is that we're going to need resources. Right. In order to really fund the sort of mental health challenges or even just medical challenges of the community, for instance, we're going to need a lot more resources than, for instance, community organizations have right now. And that means we're going to have to take them from the people that have the money, and that's part of why I see this as a revolutionary process. It's important that we build sort of in sort of a germ, a germinal of what we're trying to build and achieve. But in order to make it really work for the society beyond just small groups or people or a small amount of time, we're going to need resources. And so I think we need to combine it with that overall struggle. But I think people are really open to it right now. I think people are really sick of the way things have been. And I think people are really realizing it's untenable. It's not going to be able to continue as it has been. It's going to lead to a disaster for everybody. And so I think there's a lot more open minds to it right now. And so we have to, I think our job is again, I think Mike's example of the community self-defense groups is really important. I know that there's a bunch of stuff popped up in the wake of the uprising. Some of them were really conservative and concerned about property, and of course those tended to be more upper middle class white homeowners, not exclusively but mostly. And then there were other groups, and I know you were part of that, Mirjan, and you've probably even talked about it some on your podcast, but where there's real struggles around anti-racism and trying to get people to commit to not profiling and to supporting the youth and to not depending on the cops. So, and then there's straight up, in the Black community, patrols and also multiracial anti-racist patrols other places. So I think that stuff needs to be built on, but again, we also need to connect it to, winning real resources for the community to allocate democratically.
Yeah, and thank you for making that connection, because these same activists who have been calling for abolishing the police are the same folks who've been saying tax the rich, right? And the same conversations we've been having in our community is, if we spend a majority of those resources, I hear different numbers, but up to $200 million spent on policing in Minneapolis annually. If we spend the majority of those resources on the front end, proactively on youth programming, right, on growing community, we spend less on repairing community. So we've been having those conversations in our community for at least 4 years. And thank you for making that connection, because yes, like, preventative goes hand in hand with reactionary organizing and care. But getting people to even think outside of, the confines that we've been trapped in for over 150 years, that's such a hard part. So the one of the last things I just want to shift to real quick before I let you go is, so today I there's so much support, around a Black police chief, and, and I know you're not Black, you're anti-racist white organizer, who has been, in my view, and in the view of many Black folks here, a great ally on the ground with our communities. And so I know, you respect those sort of boundaries and let Black folks criticize our community. But I would love to get your perspective though on this idea of focusing on individual police officers versus the institution itself. And one thing I want to refer to anybody who's listening is Democracy Now! Today had Professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who happens to be my cousin. He's a brilliant scholar professor at Harvard, and he makes these direct connections from white supremacy to policing. So it's not rhetoric, it's not hyperbole when I compare the policing system in America to the Klan as a system that is beyond repair. It is beyond reform. Can you speak on that?
I think to your point about the institution, I think it's pretty well documented, the historical origins of policing in this country, and they definitely have to do with, policing the, enslaved labor of Africans in the South primarily, and then as a force of repression against the immigrant working class in the northern cities. And those are the two main functions of the police, not as mediators in the community, not as problem solvers, not as peacekeepers, but as enforcers of the status quo. And so once you understand that, then I think, there's I've seen signs and slogans around the fact that, like, the system isn't broken, it's working exactly how it was designed to. And I think people got to remember that too, that can't just be an accident, that there continues to be this relationship with the Black community and with poor people in the city and around the country. It can't just be an accident. If you look at it for over 100 years of this. And then to speak to the particulars about what your point about individuals, I think, people got to understand, that there's colonialism and there's neo-colonialism, and so the system isn't stupid, right? The system isn't like a dumb redneck or something. The system is actually fairly sophisticated, and it has to be in order to maintain its rule. And it's all, it's looking for ways for help in every way in order to make itself stronger, more flexible, more nimble, more able to deal with people and keep them from revolting. And so it's pretty clear and pre-documented that includes bringing in a certain amount of, people from oppressed communities into, a sort of neo-colonial elite. And that happens, and that's done in order to help maintain rule. So, people can be very fine people individually, like you said, and it's not really about that. It's about the system and the institution that it's serving, the structure that it's upholding. I think that's, I think everybody may have had experience with, like a boss at work who's a nice person, that it wasn't their fault, but when they had to deliver deliver the message from up the corporate chain, it wasn't really about whether your boss was nice or not. It was about this institution, this corporation, and I think it's the same with the police.
That's right, 100%, man. Again, thank you for making that connection. And I said earlier, Dr. Cornel West could no more transform the Minneapolis Police Department than Chief Arredondo, right? And respect to Arredondo. I have no hard feelings for him as a man. I don't know him personally. I know of him. I'm sure he's a great guy. And I trust that y'all know his family, or he comes from a fine family, or whatever. They're rooted in our community, right? Again, it's not about that, and that speaks to our sophisticated system that is smart enough to get a black face, right, and make it about this individual. So if you attack, policing, you're attacking the character of this black man and his black family that is rooted in your community, right? That's how sophisticated it is. And like you said, it's not a dumb redneck like Derek Chauvin is, right? So thank you for making that connection, man. Any last thoughts, man? And this is part one for everybody listening on police abolitionists and having Kieran and Mike together on the show. I've been trying to get them on for a minute, so it was really dope to connect with both of y'all at the same time. Any last thoughts, though?
Yeah, I think I appreciate the work you're doing. I think one thing that's been so encouraging to me is that like this sort of upheaval has really brought all these different kinds of projects out into the open in Minneapolis and in the Twin Cities. So like between your podcast, all the art that's going up all over the city, all the organizing that's happening, and still really good actions, like the action that happened the other day, marching on the mayor's house. I thought that was brilliant, And I think gives me hope. It gives me hope. I know today people are going to be out at the Columbus statue in St. Paul. I think we both have good idea about a proper place for that statue. So,
I didn't know there was a statue. Holy shit! Wow.
Yeah,
it's a gone.
Yeah,
y'all.
5 o'clock. 5 o'clock today.
5 o'clock. We're in St. Paul.
Yeah, at the Capitol. Yeah, it's at the Capitol. So,
okay.
Yeah. So it feels like there are more possibilities than there have ever been. Right. And that's pretty exciting. A little scary, but exciting. I appreciate the work you're doing. I think your project is one of those things that's giving hope to people. So
thank you, man. I appreciate that. Any other direct actions coming up this week you want to tell people about?
I think that's the big one that I know about. I think there's also, we're going to see some stuff starting to break out with some labor and worker stuff, and I'll make sure to keep you posted on that. I did see that Starbucks is going to be closing hundreds of stores in North America, and I'm not a great fan of that place, but that means thousands of jobs lost for mostly young people, and something to be thinking about too as this crisis continues.
Right on. All right, Kieran, I appreciate your time, man. We'll be in touch soon, brother.
All right, Marjan.
All right,
take it easy.
Peace. All right, y'all. So you heard it from the homie Kieran and the homies Mike, two OGs. They've been doing this work way longer than I have. So again, y'all, this is not about Chief Arredondo. I'm sure he's a fine man. I know a lot of people that know him. I know a lot of ladies that say he's hit on them. Watch yourself, Chief. But this is about an institution that was designed to terrorize Black people, workers, and uphold racial capitalism. And if we don't understand that, then our movement will continue to be divided, and Black people especially will continue to be divided and continue to demand, the Black folks are working against our collective interests when that our wealth is being transferred from our communities into a system that oppresses us. So let's not let them run interference on us. Do not let Mayor Jacob Fry lift a Black chief up as his Black token of reform. Minneapolis police are the poster child of reform. Before we had a Black chief, we had a gay, indigenous chief, woman, queer woman, Native American, Chief Harteau. She was terrible, and she failed at reforming the police department. She backed the murderers of Jamar Clark and she actually commended them for murdering this brother. So we got rid of her, and they replaced her with Rondo, right? Which, okay, yes, in many ways, he was a step in the right direction. But again, if you're under this spell that policing can be reformed, I just have to refer you to some history text. Keep reading, right? I'm going to keep sharing resources with y'all. So I'm going to post a link to a Time magazine article that breaks down the origins of history. And I will post a link to Democracy Now's episode from today featuring Harvard professor Dr. Khalil Gibran Muhammad. Shout out to him. Good work, cuz. Appreciate it. All right, y'all. That's it. I'm going to be back. I think Friday. I'm going to come back and bring y'all some updates. And as always, make sure we are still practicing social distancing, wear your face mask. You know, when you're in large crowds, as y'all are out here protesting and doing direct action, make sure you're safe. Live to fight another day. We need people in this work for the long haul, y'all. All right. All power to the people who organize. Peace.